Spain was the first European country to send explorers into lands that are today part of the United States. The years from 1513 to 1543 were very busy times for the Spanish explorers as they waded through the dangerous swamps of Florida, marched across the burning deserts of Arizona, and sailed up the rocky coast of California, searching for gold, new lands to conquer, and people to convert to the Christian faith. The era of the famous Spanish explorers had begun in 1492, when Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic Ocean and discovered lands that came to be called the New World. Lands that included the continents of North and South America and the islands that lay nearby. Soon after Columbus's arrival in the New World, Spain started colonies on some of the islands in the Caribbean Sea. All of these colonies were founded with the help of the well-trained Spanish soldiers called conquistadors, many of whom later became explorers. The Spanish king and the conquistadors had grown unbelievably rich from the gold they had taken from the Aztecs in Mexico and the Incas in Peru. But still they wanted more, so they began to explore lands that today are in the southern United States. Even before Spain had grown rich from the gold of the Aztecs and Incas, a man named Juan Ponce de Leon had reached what is today's state of Florida. Before becoming an explorer, Ponce de Leon had led an amazing life. In Spain, he had served in the palace of the king and queen and had helped his country defeat the Muslim kingdom of Granada. He had sailed with Columbus on his second voyage to the New World, had battled native people on 2 different Caribbean islands, and had become very rich from the gold found on one of these islands that the Spanish named Puerto Rico. It was because of his wealth and experience as a soldier that Ponce de Leon was chosen by the king to be the governor of Puerto Rico and to lead the first expedition into the unexplored lands that lay just to the north of the Spanish colonies in the Caribbean Sea. But this time, the king not only wanted Ponce de Leon to search for gold and claim new lands for Spain, he also wanted him to look for a magical spring called the Fountain of Youth, from which it was said flowed the water of life, water that had the power to cure diseases and to make old people young again. Ponce de Leon's expedition began when he sailed northwest from Puerto Rico in 1513. During his voyage, he stopped at San Salvador, the island on which Columbus had first landed in the New World. He explored other islands as he sailed north, but he could not find the Fountain of Youth. In April, he landed on the mainland of North America, in a place where many beautiful flowers grew. Because he was the first European to land here, Ponce de Leon claimed the land for Spain and named it Florida, which means full of flowers. During his expedition, Ponce de Leon explored a lot of the coast of Florida, but he never found the Fountain of Youth or any gold. A few years later, he came back to Florida to start a new Spanish colony, but it failed, and he died a little later from wounds he suffered in a battle with the native people. In 1527, a man by the name of Panfilo de Narvaez led the second Spanish expedition into the Florida wilderness to start a colony and search for gold. But once again, the explorers failed. Many men died from diseases they got, while marching through the rainy forests and in battles with Native Americans. Then they were shipwrecked in rough waters off the coast of Texas. After that, as the months went by, all but 4 men out of the 600 who had begun the expedition had died. One of the survivors, a man named Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, led the men through barren lands that are today in the southern United States. For 8 long years, they wandered on foot all the way across the North American continent until they finally reached Spanish settlements in Mexico. During these years, some of the native people the explorers met told them stories about 7 cities that lay somewhere further north that were supposed to be filled with gold and other treasures. When Cabeza de Vaca returned to Spain, he visited the king here at his royal palace and told him this story. He hoped the king would let him lead a new expedition to search for gold in North America. But the king had already decided to give this job to another man named Hernando de Soto. Hernando de Soto was born to a wealthy family who once lived not far from here in the western part of Spain. When he was only 14 years old, de Soto sailed from Spain to the New World, where he became a slave trader, and later helped Francisco Pizarro conquer the Incas of Peru. De Soto got very rich from the gold his soldiers took from the Incas. So rich, in fact, that he was able to loan money to the king. That was one of the reasons the king appointed De Soto to be the governor of the colony of Cuba and the leader of the 3rd Spanish expedition into Florida. The De Soto expedition left Cuba in 1539, and for the next 3 years, 600 Spanish explorers, along with hundreds of their slaves and servants, crisscrossed the lands of what are today the southeastern United States searching for gold. Whenever they came upon a native village, De Soto would claim their land for Spain. Then he would usually hold the chief of the tribe hostage, while his men took most of the food they had stored for winter, which was mainly squash, corn, and beans. The people in the native villages were afraid of the explorers for many reasons. One was their horses, because before the Spanish came, there were no horses in the New World. Besides having horses, De Soto and other Spanish explorers had metal armor to protect their bodies, and they used guns, crossbows, lances, swords, and vicious war dogs in the many battles they fought with the Native Americans. In 1542, near the banks of the Mississippi River, Hernando de Soto died, and after that, his expedition ended without ever finding any gold. But at the same time the De Soto expedition was exploring the American southeast, another Spanish expedition, led by a man named Francisco Coronado, was searching the dry, empty lands of the southwest. His expedition had headed north from Mexico in 1540 to find the 7 cities of gold told of by Cabeza de Vaca. The Coronado expedition was made up of over 1,000 people, along with hundreds of horses and huge herds of cattle and sheep that the explorers used for food. As the expedition slowly moved further north, oxen pulled carts like this one that were filled with supplies. The Coronado expedition crossed a huge hot desert and entered what is today's state of Arizona, where they passed small native villages like this one. As they traveled further north, it got cooler and the scenery changed. After a while, they arrived at the large villages of the Zuni tribe, which Coronado conquered. But these simple adobe villages were not the magnificent cities Coronado was looking for, and they contained no gold. Meanwhile, as Coronado camped at the Zuni villages, far to the southwest, at the mouth of the mighty Colorado River, a ship lay at anchor with more supplies for his expedition, but no one from the expedition was there when it arrived. The men from the ship began to worry and set out to find Coronado, and they searched far up the river before finally giving up. Coronado needed the supplies from the ship, but by the time his men got to the meeting place, the ship had already sailed back to its home port in Mexico with all his extra supplies. That is one reason why his expedition had to take more food from the native people than they had planned. As time passed, Coronado decided to send out search parties in the hope that they could still find the 7 cities of gold. One search party went west, and they discovered the Grand Canyon, while another group headed east, passing the ancient city of Acoma seen here, which perches high on a rocky mesa. Soon that group reached the native villages that stood along the banks of the Rio Grande in today's state of New Mexico. And here, just as they had done in other villages, the Catholic priests of the expedition tried to convert the people from their own native religion to Christianity. Later on, part of Coronado's expedition moved further east, crossing a range of mountains to reach the great pueblo of Pecos seen here. From Pecos, Coronado explored east out onto the flat grasslands we now call the Great Plains. And along the way, they hunted buffalo for food. By then, Coronado's explorers had been traveling for a long time. They finally made it as far east as the middle of today's state of Kansas. Then they gave up, and the Coronado expedition returned to Mexico without ever finding gold. The same year that Coronado returned to Mexico, a man named Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo was chosen to take ships to explore the coast of what is today California. Cabrillo was a conquistador who had helped Spain destroy the kingdom of the Aztecs in Mexico. But his greatest talent was for sailing and shipbuilding. Cabrillo's expedition sailed north from Mexico in June of 1542 in ships built in his own shipyards. By late September, they were anchored in what is now San Diego Bay in California. From San Diego, they continued on north. The sailors made maps of the coastline and stopped occasionally to trade with the native tribes who lived near the shore. Cabrillo's ships had just sailed past the beautiful Santa Lucia Mountains when Cabrillo became ill, forcing them to turn back. A short time later, he died on a small, remote island. After that, the new leader of the expedition turned the ships around, and they sailed north again. This time, the Spanish explorers may have gotten as far as today's state of Oregon. By then, they had explored over 2,000 miles, or 3,300 kilometers of unknown coastline, and supplies were running low, so they decided to go no further and sailed back to Mexico. They, too, had found no riches. Most of the men from Spain who explored North America were searching for gold, and in this search they often brought death and destruction to many tribes of innocent Native Americans. But besides these bad things, they made good maps and kept careful records of all that they had seen. They collected facts. Because of their explorations, knowledge of the world and its people was greatly improved. People stopped believing old legends such as the Fountain of Youth and the Seven Cities of Gold. And long before the Pilgrims came to New England, Spanish explorers had already brought the Christian religion, as well as their European way of life, to many parts of North America. True or false? A conquistador was a type of Spanish sailing ship. True or false? Cabrillo, De Soto, and Narvaez all died while exploring North America. True or false? Some of Coronado's explorers were the first Europeans to see the Grand Canyon. True or false? The Spanish explorers treated the Native Americans very well. True or false? Ponce de Leon got rich from the gold he discovered in Florida.